the silence that took the anthem's place, the day after the flags fell. They say the war ended on a Tuesday. That was the first time anyone noticed the anthem wasn't playing anymore. The square was oddly clean that day. Too clean, as if grief had swept the dust before memory could settle into it. Old Mrs. Albrecht, who had hung a black ribbon every year since the war began, forgot to hang one that morning. When asked why, she only looked at the empty bakery window where her son once stacked loaves before marching off. "I think the silence just arrived before I could," she whispered. The anthem used to play every morning at exactly 7 o'clock, a crackling, tired version from the mayor's office radio loud, enough to drown the cries of nightmares and soft enough to pretend everything was fine. But today, there was only the sound of pigeons returning, and a boy, no older than 10, humming the first few notes before realizing the air no longer carried the rest. He stopped, and in that pause, the entire village remembered not what was lost, but who never came back to lose anything at all. "Do we still put the flags up?" someone asked, but there were no answers, only the echo of a question that arrived too late. The window that forgot to close in the narrow house across from the school, the curtains were still open. They'd been open for 2 years, ever since Lucas left in uniform, waving from the window. His mother, Greta, hadn't closed them since. Every morning, she sat in the same wooden chair, knitting things no one would wear, and looking past the street, past the trees, past even time itself, as if hoping her son's shadow might appear just before the sunlight did. She had prepared a stew the night before, not because she expected him home, but because something in her hands still remembered how. When the knock came, she didn't move. It wasn't her son. It was a telegram folded in someone else's sorrow, delivered 3 months too late. But even so, she smiled. "I already knew," she said. And finally, she got up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains closed. For the first time since the war began, the glass reflected only herself. 2. The anthem lingers in things. Strangest thing about war is that it lingers in objects long after it leaves bodies. The anthem was no exception. It still hummed in the rusted hinges of the school gate. It still tapped a rhythm in the dripping of the water trough by the well. Still danced faintly in the sound the leaves made when the wind blew just right. Some said they heard the anthem in their dreams. Others said they never heard it at all. Not truly. But one child, Elias, only 5 years old, whispered something that made the baker cry. He was drawing with chalk on the cobblestones, sketching what looked like crooked lines and birds. When asked what he was making, he said, "I'm drawing the sound that left when Papa didn't come back." 3. The chair at the end of the table, the village hall, still had the long table from the days when plans were drawn in ink instead of blood. Each chair held the memory of a name, now etched by absence instead of attendance. One by one, people gathered again, not to vote, not to strategize, but to ask, "What do we do now?" The mayor, who had lost both sons, sat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. "Maybe we don't raise flags yet. Maybe we listen first." "To what?" someone asked. He paused, eyes tired but gentle. "To what silence is trying to tell us now that the anthem is gone. 4. What the church bells refused to ring for." Father Jacob climbed the bell tower. He didn't take the rope in his hand. He stood before the bell, looking at it as if it were a stranger. "No one teaches you how to ring joy into something that only ever echoed loss," he muttered. So he didn't. Instead, Keeked. He opened the small window at the top of the tower and let the wind carry nothing. It was the most honest sound the village had heard in years. Questions began to surface in the quiet, not shouted, not debated, but breathed. What if we only knew how to be when the anthem told us who to be? What replaces a ritual that was meant to keep us alive, but only taught us how to survive. Do we mourn peace when we never really knew it? Can we rebuild without knowing which pieces were ours to begin with? What is a homeland without the ones who gave it meaning? And the most frightening question of all, if the anthem is over, who are we now? V. The bakery that forgot how to rise. Before the war, the smell of warm bread woke up the village. It was said that Tomas Paz, the baker, could make dough rise even during a storm, as if yeast respected him. But now, his oven stayed cold most mornings. He still baked, but only once a week, not because there weren't mouths to feed, but because he no longer remembered the joy of watching something rise from fire. His hands still knew the motions, but they no longer believed in flavor. He spoke little, yet one morning a child asked, "Why doesn't the bread smile anymore?" Tomas didn't answer. He simply handed the boy a piece, warm, heavy, silent, wrapped in brown paper with the name Jonas written faintly on the corner. His son's name is the one he never stopped baking for, VI. Where the uniforms sleep now near the back of the tailor's shop. A trunk sat beneath a thin layer of dust. Inside, 6 pressed uniforms, clean, folded, UNWORN. They belonged to boys who never grew into them. Brothers, cousins, neighbors, all measured by the same tape, stitched by the same hands. Those of Mr. Wilhelm, the town tailor. He no longer stitched buttons. Now he repaired the small tears in wedding dresses in school bags. But he never opened that trunk. One day, he did, not to remove the uniforms, but to place a note inside. It read, "You were never meant to fit into war. I'm sorry I tried to tailor you for it." Then he locked it again. VII. The birds that returned first it was the crows who came back first. Black wings against gray skies, loud, unapologetic, as if mocking the silence. They flew in chaotic spirals above rooftops that still held the memory of sirens, but they also brought something else each morning. They dropped feathers near the fountain. Not just any feathers, but ones dipped in a reddish tint. No one knew where it came from. Some said berries. Others said rust. Little Anna collected them. She tied them together with twine and made a necklace. When asked why, she said, "So the silence doesn't think we forgot how to make noise." 8. Letters that outlived their writers. In the post office, a pile of unopened letters sat in the corner. Some had been returned. Others had no one left to read them, but they still arrived. And Maria, the postmistress, still sorted them as if delivering them meant someone could still be found. One letter caught her eye. It was addressed to, "It's the man I used to be. No return address." Inside, "If you read this, it means we survived. But survival isn't living, and I don't know how to be anything else. Please teach me. Please remember how." She didn't know where to send it, so she kept it, and every morning before sorting the new mail, she read it aloud to the empty room. Ix, the well that no longer echoes once. Children used to shout into the village well just to hear themselves returned. Now, when they tried, nothing came back. The water was still there, the stone rim still cold, but the echo was gone. Some said it was the weight of too many names carved into its bricks. Others believed the silence had finally claimed a voice of its own. But old Emily, the midwife, offered a different answer. Maybe the well is listening now, and maybe it's tired of being expected to answer. Portraits that refused to fade in the town hall. A wall held black and white portraits of every soldier from the village. Young faces, some with forced smiles, others defiant. Most uncertain as time passed. The glass fogged, the edges curled, yet one photograph remained untouched. It was of Matthews, the only soldier who returned. His portrait stayed crisp, bright, almost It's too alive. Someone once tried to remove it to make room for another name, but the nail refused to budge, and so it stayed. Not as a celebration, but as a question. What does it mean to come back when no one else did? She, the anthem under the floorboards. Lena, age 16, swore she heard music beneath her feet. She lived above what used to be the town's music room, now a storage for broken chairs and forgotten instruments. One night, unable to sleep, she crept downstairs and pulled up a warped floorboard. There, covered in dust and grief, was a violin case. Inside, a cracked violin and a note. When the silence grows too loud, bow gently, let morning sing. She took it upstairs. Hey, and though she didn't know how to play, her hands moved like they did. Out came not a melody, but the memory of one. 12. When the children asked too soon, the hardest part wasn't rebuilding walls. It was answering the questions asked in whispers before dinner. Where is Papa now? Okay, you fight without guns. If we win but lose people, that we really win. Why is the anthem gone if the war is over? And the one asked most often, can we sing again? The adults tried. Some said yes, some said not yet. Some smiled and changed the subject. But the truth is that no one knew which song came after war. 13. A village built on pause. The village didn't collapse. It didn't burn. It didn't vanish. It paused, like a breath held too long, like a page waiting to be turned by hands that no longer trusted the story. The clock tower still ticked, but it was no longer a leader, only a reminder. People moved. Shops reopened. Babies were born, but something invisible walked among them, a presence shaped like sound, never sung again. And in that stillness, final question began to take shape. If silence took the anthem's place, could something else take war's place? Not with flags, not with parades, but with something quieter, something earned, not victory, but voice. What echoes refused to leave. The war ended, but its voice didn't. It lingered in doorframes, in the way people hesitated before saying hello, in the way mothers stirred soup too slowly, as if every circle in the pot might rewind time. Some things returned, most didn't, and others stayed hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to say what silence was never meant to carry alone. Where laughter forgot the way back. The village square once echoed with market calls and clumsy jokes. Fathers laughed loudly, mothers rolled their eyes, children giggled at things only they found funny. But now, even joy had become cautious, like a bird, unsure if the window is still closed. One afternoon, a girl tripped chasing her brother and burst into spontaneous laughter. Heads turned, chests tightened, and someone whispered, not in judgment, but in awe, "It's been so long since I heard that sound." The silence didn't protest, bent gently. The dance that no one led before the war. Music played every Sunday. Strings, flutes, worn down drums. Couples danced, not perfectly, but with certainty. After the silence came, the instruments stayed in their cases. The hall gathered dust, and feet forgot the rhythm. But one day, under the weight of stillness, too thick to breathe, an old man named Abel brought his accordion into the empty square. He played one note, then another. No one joined, but a dog barked in time. A breeze turned a weathered page on the mayor's desk, and a woman clapped once. Not applause, recognition. Something remembered itself. 3. The garden that grew from a helmet Jonas never came home, but his brother, Emil, found his helmet near a tree where the ground had been scorched. Instead of burying it, he filled it with soil. He planted a seed inside, watered it, spoke to it. Months passed, nothing, until one morning a single green stem pushed through the dirt. It was small, but defiant. Villagers came to see, not the plant, but the act. A helmet made for war is now giving something back. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, nor was the hope.iv. When names were spoken softly again, there are names that used to echo proudly in the square. Now they were whispered like fragile glass. Mothers said them only while hanging clothes. Fathers only when drunk or alone. But one woman, Clara, chose to say her brother's name, Leon, each morning aloud. At the same bench where he once fed pigeons. No eulogy, no apology, just, "Good morning, Leon. The pigeons miss you." And in doing so, she broke a pattern. The belief that names could only belong to memory, not 2 mornings. V. The boots left by the door boots, always by the door. A habit soldiers never broke, even when barefoot. Even when the war was over, they placed their boots neatly ready, so that the next call might still come. As if peace were a rumor and orders were gospel. Old Jacob, who never spoke of what he saw, finally moved his boots under his bed, and for the first time in years, he walked barefoot through his own house. His daughter cried, not because of fear, but because he left footprints. And that meant he planned to stay. Vi. The silence between 2 widows on the bench overlooking the fields sat 2 women. One lost her husband to the east, the other to the west. They sat side by side, didn't speak for weeks, until one of them broke the silence. "I think the anthem lied to both of us." The other nodded, not in bitterness, in clarity. They didn't share grief, they shared understanding, and that somehow was heavier. All at once. 7. The choir, the kalaya, the choir, didn't need a song the church choir hadn't sung in months. Voices cracked, throats dry, hearts unsure what to believe in. One Sunday, they gathered anyway, not to perform, but to listen. The organ remained silent, but then, slowly, one by one, they humme, not words, not melody, just breath, in harmony. And that was enough. It wasn't a hymn, but it was sacred. VIII, the fire that told the truth on the outskirts of the village. Someone lit a small fire, not for warmth, not for cooking, but to burn what the war left behind. Uniforms, letters, never delivered. Orders, never questioned. People came quietly, bringing objects, a badge, a broken canteen, a flag, and they threw them in, one by one. No ceremony, no speech, only silence and the crackling of letting go eggs. When the bell rang for something else though, church bell had rung for war, for death, for announcements that broke hearts. Now it rang again, but not for loss. A baby had been born. Her name was Anja, and the bell rang once for her. Then it stopped, not because it needed to ring more, but because once was enough. Everyone in the village heard it and smiled. The first song. After silence, it wasn't grand. It wasn't planned. A young boy with a flute sat near the fountain one evening. Didn't play a song. He knew. He made one up. Simple, curious, uneven. People walked by. Some paused. One man cried, not because the tune was beautiful, but because it dared to exist. And so the silence began to change. It didn't vanish, but it learned to make room. Room for birds, for names, for songs, for breath. And beneath it all, question, whispered between rooftops. If peace sounds like this, why did we ever follow anything louder? The day the anthem wasn't missed. It was a Monday, ordinary in every sense. Clouds moved lazily across the sky. Children walked to school. The baker opened on time, and yet, for the first time, no one looked up at 7 a.m. No one paused for the anthem, because no one expected it anymore, and no one missed ITI, the clock that ticked without permission for years. The village followed the sound of that anthem like sheep to a familiar whistle. Now, without it, the clock tower's ticking became audible and unsettling. It was not the anthem. It had no rhythm, no melody, just time passing honestly, unforgivingly. Some villagers complained, "It's too loud," but others realized, "It's not louder. We just stopped drowning it out." And in that honesty, there was discomfort and relief, too. The fence that no one fixed near the edge of the village stood a wooden fence. It had been damaged during the early days of bombing, splintered, leaning, forgotten. Every month, someone would mention fixing it. Every month, it stayed the same, until one boy, Leo, walked up with a single nail and a hammer. He didn't repair the whole thing, just one slat, the one next to where his brother used to sit and smoke. When asked why, he said, "Because I still need this part to stand." No one questioned it. He brought more nails, not to rebuild, but to remember. 3. A dress sewn with leftover threads. Marta had scraps from war rations, from old uniforms, from curtains torn during evacuation drills. She didn't know why she kept them, till one afternoon she began to sew, not out of necessity, not for warmth, but for beauty. A dress, uneven, imperfect, full of patches that didn't match. She wore it to the market the next morning, and though no one said it aloud, people stared longer than usual, not out of shock, but gratitude, for color, for boldness, for someone who dared to be whole again. 4. The bench that held too much there. It's a bench near the well that people rarely used, not because it was uncomfortable, but because it remembered too much. It was where goodbye hugs happened, where last letters were written, where soldiers tied their boots, but one morning it held something new. 2 boys eating apricots. Their laughter returned to the bricks, and the bench didn't break. Someone passed by and left a flower, not for grief, for permission. The mirror that refused to lie after the war. Many villagers stopped using mirrors. Some cracked them, some covered them. Some simply avoided their own eyes. But one girl, Helena, polished every mirror in her home. "I want to see what peace looks like on my face," she said. And when she looked, she didn't see beauty. She saw return, a woman becoming, not in spite of pain, but alongside it. When the anthem returned. As a whisper one evening, a musician who had been away returned to the village. He played his violin at the edge of the square. People gathered, expecting, perhaps, nostalgia. But he didn't play the anthem. He played something that remembered it without repeating it. A whisper of its chords, a softened version, a memory reshaped by choice. No one stood in attention. No one saluted. They just listened. Some wept, some smiled, and when the music ended, no one asked for more, because what they received was enough. 7. The room that became a library. The old armory sat empty, dusty, still carrying the scent of oil and rust. But the mayor had a new idea. He opened its doors, removed the crates, painted the walls, and turned it into a library. No ceremony, just shelves, chairs, light. The first book placed was a children's story. The second, a cookbook. The third, a diary written by a soldier who never came back, donated by his mother. She wrote inside the cover so someone might finish the sentences he never could. When they laughed without guilt, it happened at the town well. Someone slipped. The splash was absurd. Cuting burst into laughter. Adults tried to scold them, but even they smiled. It was pure, undeniable joy, not as escape, but as return. And no one said they shouldn't laugh, not after all that happened, because, finally, everyone understood. Laughter is not betrayal. It's resurrection. The house that waited without walls there was one house left in ruins. No one claimed it. No one rebuilt it. But every morning, someone left a flower near the collapsed doorway. Eventually, a child asked, "Who lives there?" The answer came quietly. No one. But everyone did once. So the village made a choice. They left the house as it was, not from neglect, but reverence, a reminder that peace isn't always about rebuilding. Sometimes it's about honoring what couldn't be. Rebuiltx. The day the silence became sound, there wasn't a ceremony, no trumpet, no ribbon to cut, just a moment at dusk when everything aligned. The wind, the birds, the laughter, the creak of a gate, the footsteps on old stone. Together, they created something unexpected. Music, not composed, not rehearsed, but alive. And no one looked at their watches. No one thought about flags. They were too busy hearing, not the anthem, but life, raw, unfinished, UNCOMMANDED. And when someone finally asked, "Is this what peace sounds like?" The answer came quietly. No, this is what it sounds like when no one tells us what to sing. The memory that learned to speak. For a long time, memory had no voice in the village. It lived in gestures, in glances, in the way someone folded a napkin twice before using it. But something had begun to change. Not quickly, not loudly, just enough for the memories to speak, not to haunt, but to teach. The wall where shadows once stood near. The schoolyard was a wall where soldiers used to line up before leaving for the front. Their shadows had stayed longer than their bodies, even after rain, even after time. But one morning, a child drew outlines over them with chalk. One for each face never returned. Then she added arms and hearts, little balloons in their hands. "They don't need to march anymore," she said. Now, the wall didn't mourn. It celebrated. A letter never sent. Finally read in a drawer locked for 7 years. Johanna found a letter addressed to her husband, written the day after he died in combat. She never sent it. She couldn't. But now, with hands steadier than she expected, she read it aloud at his grave. Q left before I could say everything, so I'll say it now and let the sky decide where it lands. She folded it again, didn't bury it. Instead, she placed it under a stone near the church where the wind could carry it. Slowly, surely, word by word. When silence took a seat at the table's Sunday lunch had once been sacred. To the war, it became a ritual of empty chairs and forced smiles. But one week, the youngest child in the family set an extra plate. For who? They asked. For silence, she said. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't sad. She poured water into the glass. And then, without prompting, everyone began to speak of memories, of people, of things they had pretended not to remember. And that's how silence was no longer feared. It had been invited. And, when invited, it softened the firewood that carried a story-old wood from bombed buildings had been stacked behind the carpenter's house. No one wanted to burn it. It felt wrong. But one winter, a storm hit. The village was cold. Choices had to be made, so they burned it. And as it cracked and warmed them, people remembered this would help lives. Now, it gives warmth. It was not disrespect. T was gratitude. Sometimes, memory needs to change form to continue existing. V, the song that had no words. Boy with a harmonica walked to the bridge every morning. He didn't know how to play, but he blew into it anyway, softly, as if not to disturb the fog. One morning, the sound came out differently, not perfect, but alive. And across the bridge, an old woman smiled. She didn't say why. She just whispered, "That's the note I've been waiting for." He didn't understand, but he kept playing, because even without lyrics, the tune carried meaning. Vi. When the anthem became a garden on the hill where the monument stood, once wrapped in flags and surrounded by speeches, someone planted wildflowers. No one asked permission. No plaque explained it, just color, movement, growth. Over time, The stone base cracked. Moss crept up. The flag faded, but the flowers stayed. And every season, it changed. Just like the village. 7. The day the children played war without guns, 2 boys were running through the fields, pretending as children do. But instead of holding sticks like rifles, they held spoons. Instead of shouting fire, they yelled peace. And when one of them fell, the other sat beside him and offered imaginary tea. Adults watched in silence. Some smiled, some wept, because perhaps the greatest shift of all was this: children learning to imagine without inheriting wounds. VIII. The boat that didn't set sail by the lake. A boat had been half built when the war started. Its builder left and never returned. The frame remained a skeleton of hope, but one day his daughter came, not to finish it, but to turn it into a bench. She carved into the side. He dreamed of the sea. I dream of arrival. Now, lovers sit there. So do widows. And sometimes, just the wind icks. The path that refused to lead to war there was a trail in the forest that once led soldiers to the front. It had gone unused since the armistice, overgrown, forgotten, but a group of children cleared it, not to follow the old path, but to reroute it. They called it the Trail of Return. At the end, they placed a stone painted with blue stars, not to honor battle, but to say, we can still walk, just not in the same direction. X. The day nobody looked back wasn't planned. Just one morning, no one mentioned the anthem. No one compared anything to before the war. Dain't, read, sang, argued, danced, not because the pain had vanished, but because it had been given space to breathe, to echo, to teach, and now to rest. And as evening fell, the wind moved through the village, not as a chill, but as a companion. It didn't hum the anthem. It didn't need to, because now the village had its own voice. The moment they didn't say is because of the war for years. Every sorrow, hesitation, or strange silence was explained the same way. It's because of the war. The war had become the name for everything unspoken, but now that phrase was fading, not because people forgot, but because they finally began to name things for what they were: fear, grief, shame, hope, desire, love, and in naming them, they reclaimed the painting without uniforms in the town hall. A young artist was commissioned to paint a new mural. She was nervous. Everyone expected something patriotic, something proud. Instead, she painted a room. Just a room, a table, a coat rack, shoes kicked off at the door, a window open with wind coming in, a pot of soup on the stove. There were no people, but everyone who saw it said, "That feels like us," because sometimes peace looks like being allowed to be ordinary again. 2. The market without bartering stories for a long time. Every transaction came with a tale. You bought flour, you heard how the seller lost his leg. You asked for eggs. You were told about someone who never came home. It wasn't a complaint. It was communion. But one market day, someone bought apples, smiled, paid, and left without a single war story, and the seller let them. That was the day grief stopped being currency. 3. The shoes meant for dancing. Not running Mira found her old shoes in the attic, red, scuffed, still smelling of summer. She hadn't worn them since the night the first sirens sounded. She had run barefoot into a cellar and never looked back. Now, years later, she put them on, not to run, not to flee, but to dance, alone, in her kitchen. And her footsteps were not soft. They were proud, because silence had taught her something the anthem never could. You don't need music to move with meaning. 4. The dream that didn't end in panic. Daniel had the same dream for years. He was marching, endless road, endless orders, endless silence. But one night, the dream changed. He still walked, but now he turned off the path. There were trees, voices, laughter, and when he woke up, he didn't cry, smiled. Not because the nightmare was over, but because he had left ITV the letter they finally sent. 4 years, letters piled up in drawers, written to those gone, to those who came back but were never the same, to themselves. One morning, postmistress opened the box she had kept sealed since 1942. She picked one letter, no address, no signature, just, "I want to come home," not just to a place, but to a self I can trust. She placed it in the center of the square. No one touched it, but by nightfall, there were flowers around it, and a note, "We've been waiting, Vi." The classroom where questions had no shame during the war. Questions were dangerous. They made you look weak, disloyal, uncertain. But in the classroom now, children asked anything. Why did people fight? Why do we bury instead of burn? Why do uniforms look the same on both sides? Why did we sing if it didn't stop anything? And the teacher, instead of silencing them, answered, because questions mean we're alive. And being alive means we haven't given up on truth. 7. The photograph no longer framed in black in many homes. Photos of the fallen were framed in black, a tradition, a symbol, dot. But Ruth took the black ribbon off, not to forget, not to disrespect, but to see her brother again as he was, not as he was lost. She placed flowers beside the frame and whispered, "You don't have to carry the war for us anymore. We remember you in light now." 8. The silence that wasn't sad. One night, the village square was quiet, but no one felt heavy. No one felt afraid. There were no speeches, no sermons, no music, just people sitting together, breathing, present. And for the first time, the silence felt full. It held not absence, but presence. Ix, the tree that grew without permission in the middle of the rubble where a factory once stood. A tree began to grow. No one planted it, no one watered it. It simply emerged. Some wanted to cut it. It doesn't belong here. But others said, maybe it's the only thing that does. So they left it, and when it bloomed, the petals were the same color as the flag once raised. But no one raised a flag. This time, they just stood beneath the tree and let it speak in blossoms. X, the whisper, that replaced the anthem. Late one evening, a boy stood on a box in the center of town. He had no instrument, no uniform, no speech. He whispered something to the wind. If no one tells me what to sing, maybe I'll just listen. And so he did, to the rustling of leaves, to the creak of windows, to the beat of his own heart. It was enough, and the people around him began to hear it too. They didn't clap, they didn't salute, they didn't rise. They simply stayed, together, quiet, alive. The village that learned to begin again. There was no grand reopening, no trumpet, no priest declaring rebirth. The village slowly, shyly began to begin again. Not from the beginning, not as if nothing had happened, but precisely because everything had happened. The key left in the door. Miriam, the candle maker's widow, had never locked her door since her husband left. Not from carelessness, but hope. Every night, she left a candle lit and a bowl of warm broth near the threshold. And every morning, she picked it up untouched. Until one morning, the bowl was empty. No footprints, no note, just a key gently placed on the doormat. It wasn't her husband, but it was a gesture, a promise. We are still arriving. Olive, U.S., in different ways. 2. The language not taught in school. There were words the children never learned during the war. Words like gentle again, safe, quiet now. The teacher, Frau Elke, wrote them in big, looping cursive across the blackboard. The children looked confused. What do they mean? She smiled, then sat on the floor among them. We'll learn them together. Not from books, but from each other. And so they did, one silence at a time. 3. The day the bakery smelled like apricots, agentomas. The baker hadn't used fruit since rationing began. He said sweetness had no place in a world grieving. But one morning, he walked to the orchard behind his shop. There were apricots, ripe and waiting. He picked just 6, baked them into soft, imperfect tarts. No labels, no prices, just a sign. First bite is for memory, second is for now. The line formed quickly. No one asked for change. No one spoke loudly. The air didn't smell like morning anymore. Smelled like possibility.iv. The dress that walked into the square little Anna had never worn white. Not because of mourning, but because there had been no cloth. But on her 10th birthday, her grandmother stitched together scraps of old curtains, tablecloths, and wedding lace. The result wasn't perfect, but Anna ran into the square, spinning, dress fluttering, eyes laughing, and suddenly the square became a stage. No anthem, no orders, just freedom wrapped in thread and wind. The day they didn't tell the newborns about the war when the next child was born. Her father did something unusual. He whispered into her ear, "You don't owe the past anything. You are here for what comes next." And he didn't name her after a fallen soldier or after his own mother. He named her Lumen Light. It was the first time in a decade that a name didn't come from grief, but from the belief that light could exist without fire.vi. The well that echoed laughter again one day. Without prompting, the children returned to the well. They shouted inside their own names, silly rhymes, even the names of each other's crushes. The echo came back, clear, bright, unashamed. No one stopped them, because the echo no longer belonged to ghosts. It belonged to a generation that refused to be haunted. 7. The music that wasn't for ceremony. 2 teenagers found an old radio in the attic of the school. They fixed it, not to broadcast news or orders, but to play music.jazz. Strings, lullabies from faraway places. People gathered outside windows just to listen. Some tapped their feet. Others cried quietly, and no one said, "Turn it off," because sound, finally, was not a command. It was a choice. VIII. The day the flags stayed folded. The town council met to discuss the upcoming anniversary of the war's end. Someone suggested raising the old flags. Someone else said, "Let's try something else." They voted. Tone, no anthem, no flags, no uniforms. Instead, they read aloud the names of every teacher, every midwife, every child born during the war, every tree that had been planted, every poem that had been written and never read aloud. And when they were done, they simply rang a bell. Once. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just listened to the space left behind, to the lives moving forward. The shoes on the wire. Someone threw their shoes over a wire between 2 buildings. No one knew who, but the next morning, more pairs followed. Not from rebellion, not from mischief, from release, boots, sandals, even baby shoes. The wire bowed under their weight, but didn't break. And now, when people walk by, they smile. Not because they understand, but because they feel it. The field that refused to stay silent behind the chapel. The field that once held drills was left untouched. For years, it grew wild, uneven, unruly. Then, one night, someone placed candles across it in the shape of a spiral. At dawn, people followed the path, slowly, barefoot, at the center. Nothing was waiting. Only wind, and that was enough. We don't always need monuments, someone whispered. Sometimes we just need to keep walking. And so the village continued, not with a bang, not with a song, but with small, honest things. Candles, chalk, bread, laughter, shoes left behind, and one unspoken truth. When silence is honored, not feared, it becomes the soil for everything worth growing. The promises no one heard, but everyone made. There was a moment, not marked by a clock or calendar, when the village stopped waiting for instructions. No one said it aloud, but things began to move differently. People didn't rebuild the same things. They didn't repeat the same songs. They didn't need flags to feel connected. They made promises. Not in ceremonies, but in kitchens, in fields, in the quiet of waking up, still afraid, but rising anyway. The spoon left on the windowsill every morning. Sophia left a spoon outside her window. It belonged to her son. Aku had taken it to war and never brought it back. She found its twin while cleaning, set it outside like a signal, or maybe an apology. One morning, it was gone in its place, a folded note. I used to eat with metal. Now I eat with memory. You reminded me that I still have a name. No signature. It's gratitude in the space the spoon had left behind now felt. Completeii. The book without a cover at the library. Someone left behind a notebook. No title, no author, no spine. Inside, handwritten stories, some only a few lines, others pages long. No names, just initials, K, and silence between every word. People began adding their own. Now, the book sits on a table by the window. Anyone can write. Thumper. One can edit, and no one asks who wrote what, because sometimes healing doesn't need ownership, just room to breathe. 3. The bell that rang in reversing the outskirts of the village. There was a tiny chapel, no longer in use. Its bell had been silent for decades, rusted in place, until one day, a child climbed up and rang it backward, pulling the rope as if rewinding time. It didn't make the usual sound. It groaned, it cried. People came, not for a sermon, but to listen. And as the strange sound faded, someone said, "It's not the past calling, it's the future, clearing its throat." The picture frame turned face down. Greta had a photograph of her husband, taken the day he left. For years, she left it by her bedside, touched it each night, spoke to it in whispers. But one evening, she turned it face down, not out of anger, not out of loss, but because she wanted to look forward, not backward. The frame remained, the memory stayed, but now she slept on the side, closest to the WINDOWV. The house that played a single note. A widower named Franz had once been a violinist. After the war, he refused to touch his instrument. He said it belonged to another lifetime. But every evening, at precisely 7:15, he opened his window and played a single note. One dot, always the same. Soft, elusive. People stopped to listen. Some wept, some smiled. No one asked for more, because that one note meant more than an entire song. It was a promise. I'm still here. The promise to breathe first, answer later, before the war. People answered questions quickly. Yes, no, of course, always. But now, they paused. Not because they didn't know, but because they had learned. Not every answer needs to be fast to be true. And that pause, that single breath before speaking, became the most profound language of all. VII. The chair that no one replaced when the school's wooden chair finally broke. The janitor asked the principal if it should be thrown out. The principal looked at it, splintered, uneven, but still upright. He said, "Let it stay. The cracks hold more lessons than the seat ever did." And so it remained in the corner, not used, not ignored, just there, like a reminder that not everything broken needed fixing. Some things just needed to be seen. VIII. The day the anthem was a gardening spring. The children planted seeds where the old parade ground used to be. Sunflowers, lavender, mint, nothing. In order no rose. When asked why, they said, "We wanted to plant something that doesn't march." And when the wind passed through, the leaves rustled in a way that almost sounded like a song. A new one, unwritten, wild, alive. Ix, the bread that wasn't cut one evening. The baker left a whole loaf on the bench in the square. K, no knife, no instructions. By nightfall, pieces were missing. By morning, only crumbs remained. No one saw who took the first bite. No one asked who needed it most, but everyone who passed by whispered the same thing. May what you need find you without shame. X, the promise to not make war a story's ending at the school. The children had to write stories. One boy wrote about dragons, another about stars. A girl wrote about a river that refused to freeze. The teacher noticed none of them wrote about war. She asked why. A small boy answered, because war is where the story breaks. We want to write what happens when it keeps going. And so, the village moved on. Not quickly, not perfectly, but together with small, quiet promises. I will speak when I'm ready. I will forgive what doesn't know it needs forgiveness. I will laugh even if I cried this morning. I will plant things I may never live to see bloom. I will remember, not for pain, but for perspective. I will stay. And when asked what replaced the anthem, they answered, us, the rituals that weren't taught, but still began. There used to be rules. Stand here, salute there, bow when the anthem plays. But now, no one gave orders, and yet, rituals appeared. Not rehearsed, not enforced, just lived like breath. Like grace, small things, honest things, that made people feel like they belonged again. The 3 stones at the corner on the southwest corner of the fountain. People began placing stones. Always 3, stacked without glue, no markings. When one stack fell, someone else would rebuild. No one explained why until a boy asked his grandmother. She smiled and said, the first stone is for who we were, the second for who we are, the third for who we still get to become. 2. The door that knocked itself in an old house no one lived in. The door kept swinging in the wind. Each time it knocked, someone from the neighborhood would come check, and instead of fixing the latch, they left something behind. A flower, a note, a ribbon, a pebble. They didn't know who started it, but slowly, the house, though empty, filled with presents, they began calling it the house that still listens. 3. The umbrella left open on a perfectly dry day. A woman opened her umbrella in the center of the square and placed it upside down. She left it there and walked away. By evening, someone had filled it with lavender. The next day, berries, then books. It became a symbol, an offering bowl for joy. People left what they had, took what they needed, no questions, no judgment, and the rule became unspoken. If you're full, share. If you're empty, receive. But always leave the umbrella open. 4. The fire lit without reason one morning. An old man lit a fire in the public pit. Not for warmth, not for cooking. He just sat beside it, quiet. One by one, others joined. They didn't talk much. They brought bread, tea, stories that didn't need conclusions. And when the fire dimmed, they let it go out. It became known as the fire that didn't ask why. V. The clothesline that caught secrets in the alley between 2 buildings. Someone strung a rope, not for drying clothes, but for hanging letters. No names, just words written on scraps. I still talk to him in my dreams. I never learned how to say I was sorry. I want to fall in love without guilt. Don't remember who I was before I was afraid. Each morning, some were gone. New ones took their place, and sometimes someone would add a reply. Me too. Vi. The empty cup left at the door after every funeral. Someone began leaving a cup on the doorstep of the grieving family. It wasn't filled, that was the point. The emptiness said, I see your absence. I make room for it. No one knew who started the custom, but it spread Soon, cups began appearing for other reasons: divorce, miscarriage, lost friendships, regret, and, over time, people began leaving them for themselves. A ritual of gentleness, a gesture that said, even emptiness deserves a place at the table. The chalk circles in front of doors. Children began drawing chalk circles outside their homes, small, delicate, blue dot. At first, it seemed like a game. Then, someone asked what they were for. One girl answered, so the sadness knows where to sit before it enters. 8. The window that was never closed again. One woman, Clara, opened her kitchen window after years of keeping it sealed. She baked bread and left the smell to wander. She brewed tea and always set 2 cups, one for herself, one for the air. People passed by and waved. She never invited anyone in. But the open window said everything. I'm still here, still breathing, still warming something. It became known as the window that waited for nothing. 9. The candle lit at midday. Lighting candles had always been an evening act, for loss, for memory, for prayer. But one boy began lighting his at noon, when the sun was highest, when light was already everywhere. When asked why, he said, because not all darkness waits for night. Now, midday candles line the bakery, the clinic, even the school, not for morning, but for moments that feel heavy, even in the light. X. The rain dance without rhythm. One morning, it rained gently after weeks of drought, and, without speaking, children ran into the square. They danced, stumbled, shouted, lifted their faces. No rhythm, no choreography, just presence. Adults watched. From windows, some shook their heads. Others joined, and for a few minutes, the village remembered something that had been stolen and now returned, not by force, but by invitation. Joy, unexplained, unapologetic. And so, rituals returned, not from tradition, but from truth, not to restore the past, not to control the future, but to say, we are still here, we are still trying. We are allowed to begin again in strange and beautiful ways. And though no one called it worship, though no one sang in unison or wore the same colors, everyone felt it. Something sacred was happening. In spoons, in stones, in umbrellas, in windows, in rain. The things no one saw, but everyone felt. There were no photos, no announcements, no recordings, but something had shifted. Not in the streets, not in the rules, not in the buildings, in the air, in the way someone paused before speaking. A day. Space left between question and answer. The anthem was gone, but its absence and everything it had once tried to cover remained. And the people began to feel what had never been: SHOWNI, the breath that broke the room during the town meeting. No one spoke for 10 full minutes, not because they were unsure, but because they knew that whatever came next would matter. Then, a woman, quiet, overlooked for years, took a deep breath, not dramatic, not forced, just human, and something in the room softened, as if her breath gave everyone permission to exhale. No vote was cast, no decision reached, but people walked out different. 2. The chair that wasn't sat in at the cafe, a table near the window, always had one empty chair. It wasn't reserved, it wasn't broken, but no one sat there until one day a child did. She looked confused. Why is no one here? The owner smiled. 'Cause sometimes we leave a place open, not for someone else, but for the part of ourselves we're still waiting to find. 3. The umbrella that was never picked up after a spring storm. Someone left a dark green umbrella leaning against the door of the chapel. 4 days, it remained dry, upright, patient. People passed it, noticed it, but no one claimed it. After a week, someone placed a flower inside, then a ribbon, then a note. Not everything that shelters us needs to belong to us. It became known as the umbrella for strangers. 4. the plate that washed itself out a shared outdoor sink near the bakery. One plate was always left behind, dirty, chipped, forgotten, yet every morning clean. No one saw who did it. No one asked, until one girl said, "Maybe the plate isn't for food anymore. Maybe it's for grace." And from then on, people started leaving thank yous in chalk beside it, not directed at anyone, just into the WORLDV, the gate that was never locked again at the edge of the village. A rusted gate marked where the military road used to begin. After the war, it was locked shut, symbolic, final, but someone, without saying a word, opened it. Not to leave, not to forget, but to unblock something. Grass grew around it. Children ran through it. It became a portal, not to war, but to freedom of movement. And every time it swung in the breeze, the metal whispered, "You don't have to be afraid to step forward." VI. The note under the pillow. Lena had been having the same dream for weeks. Running, no shoes, K, her mouth full of words she couldn't speak. One night, she wrote them on a piece of paper and placed it under her pillow. In the morning, she didn't remember the dream, but she remembered something else. "I deserve to wake up without panic." She never told anyone, K. But after that, other girls in the village began doing the same, not to escape dreams, but to reclaim their sleep. 7. The touch that wasn't expected. Two men, once soldiers on opposing sides, stood in line at the bakery. Hey, they didn't speak, but when one reached for the same loaf, their fingers brushed. Instead of pulling away, they paused, and then one nodded, the other returned it. No apology, no explanation, just the human truth that pain doesn't have a uniform, and healing doesn't ask for permission. 8. The clock that didn't work. Bastati, the library, an old wall clock, had stopped at 4:06. The librarian was offered a replacement. She declined. This one reminds us that not everything needs to move to have meaning. Children would ask about it. She'd smile and say, "That's the minute we remembered we could be still." And from then on, 4:06 became a symbol. Some left books open to that page. Others paused for a moment when the sun touched the window just right. A minute frozen, not in trauma, but in consciousness. IX. The scarf that changed next. Someone left a red scarf on the park bench. It was cold. The next day, a different person was wearing it. Then a week later, another dot. Eventually, no one knew whose it was, but the scarf kept moving from shoulders to hands to bags to trees to doorways. Not stolen, not owned, shared, a mobile warmth, a silent kindness. X. The prayer that was just a whisper inside the chapel. Candles burned low, and instead of prayers, people began whispering single words as they lit them. Please, Nuff, stay, begin, again, you, number. Full sentences, no structure, just breath wrapped around longing. And when the last candle flickered, someone whispered, "Thank you," not to a god, not to a statue, but to the space that had held them. Invisibility became sacred, and in the absence of spectacle, the village found something more intimate than anthem, more enduring than stone. The sound of two hands meeting in silence, the scent of something shared without needing names, the brief stillness that lets truth pass through unnoticed. They no longer needed to see everything, because what they felt was finally enough. The lives that grew in the space war forgot what grows in a place once soaked with command, obedience, and mourning. At first, weeds, then questions, then lives. Not perfect ones, not grand ones, but honest, stubborn, luminous lives that sprouted in the cracks war left behind. The garden in a boot someone left, a soldier's boot on the windowsill. It had holes in the sole and dried blood at the tip. But days later, something green appeared inside, a tiny sprout curling from the torn leather. No one planted it. No one watered it, but the villagers took turns watching it grow. It became a tradition, the boot garden. And eventually, they didn't see the blood anymore. They saw the possibility of something NKLLABLE.II. The song, sung while folding laundry, Elka never sang again after her husband died. To church, not in memory. Until one day, folding his old shirts, she hummed. Not the anthem, not a hymn, just a soft, circular melody that had no words. It rose with the scent of soap and sun. Her granddaughter asked, "What song is that?" She replied, "I don't know. Maybe it's just the sound of doing what still needs to be done." 3. The baby named for no one. When Emil and Sophia had their first child, the village expected a name. A grandfather, a fallen friend, a local hero. They chose instead Nova, not in honor, Tave, in hope. Because she's not here to continue a story, she's here to begin one. It was the first name in years, not tied to the past. It became a quiet revolution. IV. The poems left in the walls when the old schoolhouse was being repainted. Workers found slips of paper tucked into the walls. Each held a poem. Some just a line. I dream in colors I've never seen. Please don't forget my laughter. I wrote this so I'd still exist somewhere. No signatures. People cried, then posted them on a board in the square. Soon, others added their own, and the board became what no anthem could ever be. A language of shared becoming. V. The silence between two lovers. They didn't kiss in public. They didn't hold hands. They barely spoke. But every morning, one would leave a plum on the other's WINDOWSILL, and every night, the other would place a pebble near the first store. They never explained it, but the village noticed how grief can still make room for longing, how some love stories don't need pages, only presence. Vi. The mud that became paint children dug in the field behind the chapel and found old clay, rich and red. They made paint. They didn't ask permission. They painted the sides of houses, the walls of the bakery, even the tail of the mayor's cat. Their paintings were crude, messy, but alive. When someone complained, the teacher said, "After so much gray, don't we deserve some color that isn't planned?" 7. The day no one interrupted in the school, the teacher gave a simple task. Speak about someone who made you feel like you mattered. Each child stood, spoke, sat, no giggles, no side talk. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was sacred. When the last student finished, no one clapped. No one needed to, because being heard was a celebration. 8. The quilt that carried. Their namesake group of women collected fabric from the homes of everyone who had lost someone, shirts, sheets, curtains, even shoelaces. They stitched them into a giant quilt, not uniform, not symmetrical. Each patch carried a name, a whisper, a memory, but in the center, it left a square, empty, blank, so that no story would ever be too late to be added. Ix. The place where birds returned for years. The birds avoided the tower, where the speakers once blared the anthem. Too loud, too jarring, too trained. But now, with the speakers gone, they came back. First crows, then doves, then sparrows. They built nests inside the horn-shaped mounds of metal. And at dawn, her songs replaced the anthem completely. The mayor, once a proud officer, simply said, "They've earned the morning now. We had our chance." The things no one saw, but everyone felt. There were no photos, no announcements, no recordings, but something had shifted. Not in the streets, not in the rules, not in the buildings, in the air, in the way someone paused before speaking, in the space left between question and answer. The anthem was gone, but its absence and everything it had once tried to cover remained, and the people began to feel what had never been SHOWNI, the breath that broke the room during the town meeting. No one spoke for 10 full minutes, not because they were unsure, but because they knew that whatever came next would matter. Then, a woman, quiet, overlooked for years, took a deep breath. Not dramatic, not forced, just human. And something in the room softened, as if her breath gave everyone permission to exhale. No vote was cast, no decision reached, but people walked out different. To the chair that wasn't sat in at the cafe, a table near the window always had one empty chair. It wasn't reserved, wasn't broken, but no one sat there until one day a child did. She looked confused. Why is no one here? The owner smiled. Because sometimes we leave a place open, not for someone else, but for the part of ourselves we're still waiting to find. 3. The umbrella that was never picked up after a spring storm. Someone left a dark green umbrella leaning against the door of the chapel. 4 days it remained, dry, upright, patient. People passed it, noticed it, but no one claimed it. After a week, someone placed a flower inside, then a ribbon, then a note. Not everything that shelters us needs to belong to us. It became known as the umbrella for strangers. 4. The plate that washed itself at a shared outdoor sink near the bakery. One plate was always left behind, dirty, chipped, forgotten, yet every morning, clean. No one saw who did it. No one asked, until one girl said, maybe the plate isn't for food anymore. Maybe it's for grace. And from then on, people started leaving thank yous in chalk beside it, not directed at anyone, just into the WORLDV, the gate that was never locked, organic, the edge of the village. A rusted gate marked where the military road used to begin. After the war was locked shut, symbolic, final, but someone, without saying a word, opened it. Not to leave, not to forget, but to unblock something. Grass grew around it. Children ran through it. It became a portal, not to war, but to freedom of movement. And every time it swung in the breeze, the metal whispered, you don't have to be afraid to step forward. Vi, the note under the pillow. Lena had been having the same dream for weeks. Running, no shoes. Her mouth full of words she couldn't speak. One night, she wrote them on a piece of paper and placed it under her pillow. In the morning, she didn't remember the dream, but she remembered something else. I deserve to wake up without panic. She never told anyone. But after that, other girls in the village began doing the same. Not to escape dreams, but to reclaim their sleep. 7. The touch that wasn't expected. 2 men, once soldiers on opposing sides, stood in line at the bakery. They didn't speak, but when one reached for the same loaf, their fingers brushed instead of pulling away. They paused, and then one nodded, the other returned it. No apology, no explanation, just the human truth that pain doesn't have a uniform and healing doesn't ask for permission. 8. The clock that didn't work, but stood in the library. An old wall clock had stopped at 4:06. The librarian was offered a replacement. She declined. This one reminds us that not everything needs to move to have meaning. Children would ask about it. Kay, she'd smile and say, that's the minute we remembered we could be still. Kay. And from then on, 4:06 became a symbol. Some left books open to that page. Others paused for a moment when the sun touched the window just right. A minute, frozen, not in trauma. Geez. The scarf that changed next. Someone left a red scarf on the park bench. It was cold. The next day, a different person was wearing it. Then, a week later, another dot. Eventually, no one knew whose it was, but the scarf kept moving, from shoulders to hands, to bags, to trees, to doorways. Not stolen, not owned, shared, a mobile warmth, a silent kindness. X the prayer that was just a whisper inside the chapel. Candles burned low, and instead of prayers, people began whispering single words as they lit them. Please, Nuv, stay, begin again, you, number. Full sentences. No structure, just breath wrapped around longing. And when the last candle flickered, someone whispered, thank you, not to a god, not to a statue, but to the space that had held them. Invisibility became sacred, and in the absence of spectacle, the village found something more intimate than anthem, more enduring than stone, the sound of two hands meeting in silence, the scent of something shared without needing names. The brief stillness that lets truth pass through unnoticed. They no longer needed to see everything, because what they felt was, funnily enough, the lives that grew in the space war forgot. What grows in a place once soaked with command, obedience, and mourning. At first, weeds, then questions, then lives. Not perfect ones, not grand ones, but honest, stubborn, luminous lives that sprouted in the cracks war left behind. The garden in a boot someone left a soldier's boot on the windowsill. It had holes in the sole and dried blood at the tip. But days later, something green appeared inside, a tiny sprout curling from the torn leather. No one planted it, Taze, no one watered it, but the villagers took turns watching it grow. It became a tradition, the boot garden. And eventually, they didn't see the blood anymore. They saw the possibility of something unklabl.ii. The song sung while folding laundry Elka never sang again after her husband died. Not in church, not in memory, until one day, folding his old shirts, she hummed. Not the anthem, not a hymn, just a soft, circular melody that had no words. It rose with the scent of soap and sun. Her granddaughter asked, "What song is that?" She replied, "I don't know. Maybe it's just the sound of doing what still needs to be done." 3. The baby named for Noan, Emil, and Sophia had their first child. The village expected a name, a grandfather, a fallen friend, a local hero. They chose instead Nova, not in honor, it in hope, because she's not here to continue a story. She's here to begin one. It was the first name in years not tied to the past. It became a quiet revolution. IV. The poems left in the walls when the old schoolhouse was being repainted. Workers found slips of paper tucked into the walls. Each held a poem. Some just a line. I dream in colors I've never seen. Please don't forget my laughter. I wrote this so I'd still exist somewhere. No signatures. People cried. Then posted them on a board in a square. Soon, others added their own, and the board became what no anthem could ever be. A language of shared becoming. V. The silence between two lovers. They didn't kiss in public. They didn't hold hands. They barely spoke. But every morning, one would leave a plum on the other's WINDOWSILL, and every night, the other would place a pebble near the first store. They never explained it, but the village noticed how grief can still make room for longing, how some love stories don't need pages, need presence. By the mud that became paint children dug in the field behind the chapel and found old clay, rich and red. They made paint, paid. They didn't ask permission. They painted the sides of houses, the walls of the bakery, even the tail of the mayor's cat. Their paintings were crude, messy, but alive. When someone complained, the teacher said, "After so much gray, don't we deserve some color that isn't planned?" 7. The day no one interrupted in the school. The teacher gave a simple task. Speak about someone who made you feel like you mattered. Each child stood, spoke, sat, no giggles, no side talk. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was sacred. When the last student finished, no one clapped. No one needed to, because being heard was the celebration. 8. The quilt that carried their names. A group of women collected fabric from the homes of everyone who had lost someone. Shirts, sheets, curtains, even shoelaces. They stitched them into a giant quilt, not uniform, not symmetrical. Each patch carried a name, a whisper, a memory, but in the center, they left a square, empty, blank, so that no story would ever be too late to be added. Ix, the place where birds returned for years. The birds avoided the tower, where the speakers once blared the anthem, too loud, too jarring, too trained. But now, with the speakers gone, they came back. First crows, then doves, then sparrows. They built nests inside the horn-shaped mouths of metal. And at dawn, their songs replaced the anthem completely. The mayor, once a proud officer, simply said, "They've earned the morning now. We had our chance." X. The doorframe that grew with every goodbye. At the edge of the village, there was a wooden arch. Every time someone left for a new town, a new life, a new love, they carved their initials on it. The wood filled up as they added more planks, then more. It wasn't a monument to staying. It was a tribute to leaving well. And for those who returned, they touched their old letters and added a new one beside it. Proof that becoming never ends. So life grew, not as a replacement for loss, but as its companion. It filled the spaces the anthem could never touch, inside the small acts of staying, in the things no one asked permission to do, in the joy that arrived without warning, in the pain that stayed but no longer ruled, and in the unshakable truth. We don't grow from silence breaking. We grow from what we choose to plant in the quiet. End of part 10. Approximately 5.000 real words. Desea, QEU, Saiga.com. Apart 11 to 15. Agora. O, prefer, phaser, uma, pausa, para, preparer. Discrete cow, emotional E, symbolica, para, O video, prompt, illustrado, para, thumbnail phrases. Per, kappa, C, T, A. Emotional, para, comentarios. Tags, SEO, otimizadas, STO. Otimize, OQ. Voca, Quiza, Agora. Voca, Dis. Continuo. Chat GPT Dis. Perfeito. Continuomos.com. Apart 11 to 15. Durotero. The silence that took the anthem's place. Montendo, o mesmo, estilo, emotional, simbólico, e, profundamente, humano. Nesta parte, exploramos, como, o tempo, antes, am inimigo, durante, a guerra, seito nu, aliado, silencioso, de Kira, cada, dia, pasu, Akira, casu, e lavisa, ao, mesmo, tempo. The silence that took the anthem's place, part 11 of 15. The days that didn't rush to mean anything in war. Time is measured in loss, in absence, in names scratched onto metal, in meals skipped, in moments stolen. But now, in this slow aftertime, was no longer a warning. It was an invitation, not to move faster, but to notice. It's to be I. The calendar with no dates on the bakery wall. Tomas hung a calendar, but he never filled in the numbers. No holidays, no appointments, just 12 blank grids. When asked why, he said, "So I can choose what the day becomes, instead of letting the past decide for me." Over time, people started writing their own words on the blank squares. Today, I smiled without guilt, held someone's hand for the first time in years. Did nothing and survived it. The calendar became a mirror. It's one that never judged the speed of healing. 2. The clock that chimed for meals, not warnings. The old church bell had once rung for raids, for curfews, for silence. Now it rang at noon and 6, not for fear, but for soup and stew and company. Children would run when they heard it, not to hide, but to eat. An elder smiled, remembering how the sound that once meant run now meant come sit with us. 3. The day they didn't expect anything big. There was a Tuesday when nothing happened. No births, no news, no decisions. And instead of trying to make something of it, the village accepted it. People still went to the well, still folded laundry, still watched clouds shift. That night, someone wrote on the board in the square, "Today was ordinary, and that was sacred." 4. The bench that waited, a wooden bench near the school, had begun to sag in the middle. No one replaced it. No one repainted it, but people sat there anyway. One girl sat every Thursday at 4 p.m., always alone. One day, someone asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" She replied, "No, I'm waiting for the part of me that doesn't have to wait anymore." And slowly, others joined her. The bench never asked what they were waiting for, only that they showed up. The door that closed softly, the tailor. Mr. Wilhelm had a door that squeaked, sharp and abrupt. After the war, he oiled it, not for convenience, but because he said, "Some sounds are no longer needed. I want my door to say welcome now." Now, when the door closes, it's barely heard, but everyone notices it, because softness in this village had become a form of strength. The days measured in spoons, not steps before. Survival was about how far one could run, how much one could carry. Now, it was how gently one could stir a pot, how slowly one could sip tea, how quietly one could mend socks. People began measuring progress, not in miles, but in teaspoons. Did you take care of something today? Did you rest before you collapsed? Did you remember to exhale? They were small questions, but they were enough to make a life. 7. The dust that was left on purpose in the museum room of the school. Dust had gathered on the medals and helmets. Some offered to clean it, but the teacher refused. Let it stay. Dust is how time apologizes for moving too quickly. It's how we remember without polishing the pain. 8. The hour with no name at sunset. Something happened. Shadows stretched, the sky warmed, and no one had a word for it. Not quite evening, not quite night. They began calling it the hour without name, and during that time, people sat by rivers, wrote letters, walked without shoes, said things they couldn't say in daylight. It became the hour where truth came softly, unannounced. The day they forgot the war. Briefly, a boy laughed. So, hard milk came out of his nose. A dog barked at a butterfly. A woman sang an off-key song while sweeping, and no one, not one person, mentioned the war. It wasn't disrespect, wasn't erasure, it was relief. The day ended, the stars came, and someone finally whispered, "We forgot for just a moment." And I think they would have wanted that. The time they gave to a stranger, a traveler passed through, not a refugee, not a veteran, someone with tired shoes and kind eyes. He asked for nothing, but the village gave him soup, stories, a place to sleep. When he left, he said, "I've walked through many towns. Yours is the first that didn't ask who I used to be." And someone answered, "That's because we're still becoming too." So time softened, not to heal faster, but to matter more. A second became enough to change a memory. An hour could teach you how to trust your own breath. A day didn't need to be special to be sacred, and the anthem was no longer missed. Because now, the rhythm of the village was not imposed. It was chosen. The promises they never said, but always kept. Not every vow needs a witness. Some begin in the eyes, some in the way someone stays, others in how someone doesn't leave, even when they could. In the quiet that followed the anthem's last echo, a new kind of loyalty began to grow. Not to nations, not to ideas, but to each other. And these were the promises that shaped the village now. Eyed the door that was always unlocked at night. Marta lived alone since 1941. She never remarried. She never traveled. But every night, without fail, she left her door unlocked. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she said, someone might need a way in more than I need a way out. And one night, someone did. A runaway girl, barefoot and crying. Marta made tea, didn't ask questions, just listened. And from that day forward, the house was known as the place you could still come home to. 2. The hand that waited. Palm open. Johann had lost his hearing during a shelling, but every Sunday he sat near the square fountain with his hand outstretched, palm open, eyes soft. He never said why until a child came and placed a stone in his hand. He smiled and nodded. Soon, people began bringing him small objects: a cherry pit, a paper flower, a drawing, a note with no writing. Johann never spoke, but his hand said, I'm still here, and I'm still receiving the world. 3. The firewood that always appeared at the edge of the village. An old man lived alone. He never asked for help, never complained, but each morning in winter there was fresh firewood by his door, cut, stacked, neatly tied. No one knew who brought it, just knew it always came. A silent pact. Your warmth is our responsibility, even if you never ask. 4. The meals left without names after the war. Not everyone had enough, but no one knocked. No one begged. Instead, people left meals on certain doorsteps, wrapped in cloth. Still warm. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes bread, sometimes a single boiled egg. No note, no signature, just a truth shared without discussion. Your hunger is never a burden we ignore. V. The glove found in the pocket. To Sig hadn't worn his winter coat in years. But one cold morning, he put it on. Inside the pocket, a glove, not his, not from anyone he remembered, just there, a perfect fit. He smiled, tears catching in his beard, because he understood. Someone once thought of me, even if I never knew when. Vi. The stranger who was always greeted first. A woman moved to the village, quiet, alone, unsure. She walked with her head down, didn't make eye contact, but every morning someone greeted her first. A nod, a smile, a good morning placed, like a flower at her feet. Over time, she lifted her head, then waved, then spoke, and eventually she was the one who greeted others first. No one told her she belonged. They just treated her as if she always had. 7. The promise to stay until the last word. In the library, a boy read aloud every Wednesday. He had a stutter, took too long, lost his place often, but the room was always full. No one ever left, even when he stumbled, even when it hurt, because the village had made a silent promise. If you speak, we will stay until your voice becomes whole. 8. The shoes cleaned by the door. In rainy days, someone began cleaning the shoes left outside the bakery. Just a rag, care, no thanks. Expected, no name left behind. People noticed, and they started cleaning others too. It became a ritual, because even a muddy shoe deserved to be reminded. You're welcome here. 9. The wedding without witnesses, yet everyone came. My couple married quietly beneath a tree near the well. No invitations, no music, no decorations. But as the day wore on, people came. Some brought candles, some brought bread. Someone brought a ribbon to tie their hands together. No one rehearsed, no one planned, but everyone knew what to do, because some unions don't need blessing. They created by simply existing. X. The candle that was relit every time it went out. There was a candle on the chapel altar, small, faint, always flickering. It went out often from windtime exhaustion, but every time it died, someone relit it. Not always the same person, Not always in the same way. It wasn't religion. It wasn't tradition. It was a quiet agreement. Hope does not stay lit on its own. We are all its keepers. And so the village kept its promises without needing to speak them. A place at the table. A hand to carry the silence. A breath held for someone else. A door that remembered who once knocked and never got in. Answer. They did not need to swear anything, because in the absence of an anthem, in the presence of new beginnings, the only vow that mattered was this: I see you, I choose you, again and again. The grief that became a garden. Grief doesn't end. It changes shape, softens its edges, and becomes quiet company. The village had learned this, that grief is not a door you walk through once. It's a garden you tend for the rest of your life. And now the garden was blooming. The tombstone, covered in mostar, was a grave that no one visited. No flowers, no candles, no name, just a stone, bare, faded, quiet. Then, one day, a girl brought a brush and a bucket of water. She cleaned it, sat beside it, sang. Someone asked, "Was he your father?" She said, "No, but someone once waited for him." That's enough. The next morning, the stone had a flower, and by the end of the week, the moss was gone. 2. The songs that only the trees knew. A woman named Elsie would walk into the forest at dusk and sing. No words, just notes. Melodies that rose like breath, low and warm. She never sang for people, only trees, she said. They remembered the voices that never came home. So I sing where those voices might still echo. Over time, others followed. It's not to watch, but to sing. 2. The forest became a choir of unspoken names. 3. The room where grief was allowed to sita. Building was converted into something called the room of still things. Inside, chairs, blankets, paper, a box of tissues. A candle that never stopped burning. There were no signs, no instructions, just a door that said, "You can be here," without explaining why. People came. Some stayed 5 minutes. Some stayed all day. No one asked what they were grieving, because here, grief was allowed to just exist without needing to defend its shape. 4. The coat that was worn again for years. Hannah kept her sister's coat folded in a drawer, untouched, 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 until one morning it rained hard, and Hannah, without thinking, pulled it out and put it on. It still smelled like rosemary and ash. She wore it to the bakery, to the market, to the river. Someone asked, "Isn't that your sister's?" She smiled, not with sorrow, but something quieter. "Still wants to walk, so I'm letting it be." The cup that never broke. A clay cup, handmade by a boy who died young, sat on the shelf of the library. It was fragile, cracked, delicate, but it never broke. Librarians moved it, cleaned around it, protected it, because somehow the more fragile it looked, the more essential it felt. A symbol of what remains, even when it probably shouldn't. The story read until the pages fell out. There was a book in the classroom, titled "When We Return." The cover was torn. The spine was gone. The pages worn by 100 fingers. No one knew who wrote it, but the teacher read it aloud every Friday, even when students had memorized it, even when the binding gave up, because some stories don't need to be preserved. They need to be used until they dissolve into the people who hear them. 7. The empty bed that wasn't made in one home. There was a guest room that had never been touched, not out of neglect, but love. The bed remained unmade, the pillow untouched. A robe still hung on the door. When asked why, the homeowner said, "Because not all presence is physical. Some people keep arriving even after they've left." And no one argued, because some absences ask only to be respected, not filled. VIII. The grave with a second name added later. One woman lost her fiancé. He died before they married. He had a grave. I did, until decades later. Her children engraved her name beside his dot. Same stone, different dates, shared soil. Someone asked, was that allowed? He replied, he was her home. Where else would she rest? X. The scarf that became a Kite woman brought her father's scarf to the meadow, held it to the wind, tied it to a frame, and let it fly. Hi. Someone watching asked, isn't that too precious to risk? Scant. I want to see it dance once before I let it rest. And when the kite came down, the scarf was torn, but beautiful. More beautiful than it had ever been folded in a drawer. X the memory that asked nothing in return. People used to fear forgetting, as if memory was a duty. But now they began to trust that love didn't need to be remembered to remain real. It didn't need a statue, or a poem, or even a name. Just a feeling like warmth on skin, or the echo of a laugh, or the pull of a place you've never been, but recognize anyway. And that was enough, because grief had done its job. It kept them company until they could keep themselves, so the village grew flowers out of sorrow. Not to erase it, but to honor what it made room for. And grief stopped being a wound. It became a garden. Some parts wild, parts trimmed, some parts still growing. All of it alive. And no one feared silence anymore, because now they knew silence was not emptiness. It was the space where everything still had a chance to bloom. The peace that had to be vented every day. Peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It grows in the cracks, in the choices, in the refusals. The village didn't inherit peace. They built it, not once, but again and again. Each day they invented a version of it, even if it was fragile, even if it had holes. The rule they never wrote down. No one shouted anymore, not even in frustration. The rule wasn't posted, wasn't discussed, but everyone felt it. If you can say it softer, do. Children were the first to follow, the neighbors, then even the blacksmith. Even pain began arriving quieter, not to be hidden, but to be held gently. 2. The blanket that covered everyone. Someone knitted a blanket big enough to cover an entire bench, then left it there. No note, no expectation. The next morning, 2 women sat beneath it. Then 3. Then an old man brought tea. It became known as the peace blanket, not because it prevented cold, but because it invited togetherness. Even strangers felt welcome there. 3. The fence that was replaced by a garden between 2 houses stood a rotting fence. No one remembered who built it or why. Then, one day, it was gone. In its place, basil, tomatoes, wildflowers. The owners didn't speak, it just watered. And when asked why, one said, we realized we were both lonely, and fences never fed anyone. 4. The school, where mistakes were celebrated in class. The teacher hung a string across the wall, labeled beautiful errors. Every time a child made a mistake they felt bad about, they wrote it on a card and hung it up. Some examples: I called the moon the sun. I spelled my own name wrong. I thought sadness was something to hide. The wall filled up, and eventually the children laughed every time they added something new, because peace isn't perfect. It's safe enough to be FLAWEDV. The bridge no one crossed first. There was a narrow bridge over a stream. One day, 2 villagers approached it from opposite sides. They both stopped, smiled, waited, gestured for the other to go first. They both stepped back. Then they both stepped forward at the same time. Laughter. Eventually, they crossed together. Now it's called the Bridge of Almost Arguments, a monument to the kind of peace that begins with shared hesitation. Why? The coin that stayed in circulation. A child found a coin on the ground. Instead of keeping it, she bought a flower and gave it to her teacher. The teacher used the same coin to buy a loaf of bread, gave it to a sick neighbor. The neighbor used it to buy a candle and gave it to the chapel. Soon, everyone knew the coin by its dented edge. They called it the peace coin, a small economy of giving. No one wanted to keep it, only to pass it on. VII, the clock that counted kindness in the town square. Someone repurposed an old broken clock. They wrote over the numbers: 1, breathe; 2, listen; 3, offer; 4, wait; 5, forgive; 6, rest; 7, laugh; 8, write; 9, hold; 10, ask; 11, walk; 12, begin again now. When someone asks what time it is, people reply, it's time to forgive. It's time to walk. It's time to begin again. The map that led nowhere child drew a map of the village, but instead of roads, there were feelings. Here is where I felt brave. This is where I said goodbye. This tree helped me breathe better. The map was framed and hung on the wall of the library, not to guide people through the village, but to guide people back into themselves. Ike's, the story they didn't finish, Amen, began writing a story about peace. He left the last page blank. When asked why, he said, because if I finish it, you'll think peace is complete. But it's a story we're all still writing. Visitors were invited to add a single sentence. No two were the same, but all of them ended with the same word: together. X, the anthem that became a whisper again one evening. Someone sang the first few notes of the old anthem. People froze, but the singer stopped, smiled, and finished with something new. A whisper, a wordless hum, a vibration between ribs. It wasn't nostalgic, it wasn't sorrowful. It was peace, raw and unfinished. And someone whispered back, we don't need to sing louder anymore. We just need to listen more closely. So they kept inventing peace with chalk, with silence, with apologies, the first steps, and not one of them believed peace was perfect. But they all believed this: peace isn't what you wait for. Peace is what you make possible again and again, especially when it would be easier not to. What remained when no one was watching. Not every story ends with a full stop. Some just fade into breath, into echo, into someone walking away. Finally, at peace, the village didn't rebuild everything. It didn't want to, because what remained, what stayed, what returned, what was planted and never again pulled by force was enough. The room that was left unlocked forever in the center of town. A small room had once been the radio office, where orders were transmitted, lives interrupted, futures rerouted. After the war, they never reopened it. They left the door open. They swept the floor. They placed a single chair in the middle, and nothing more. Visitors would sit for a while, listen to the silence. Some said they heard static. Others said they heard birds. No one argued, because what mattered wasn't what they heard, but that they chose to listen at all. 2. The field where no one built there was land, fertile, open, perfect for houses or roads, but no one touched it. Not out of fear, not out of indecision, but respect. Once, K-Boy asked why. The old farmer replied, because sometimes peace needs a place to rest. 2. Now, the field is called the Quiet Meadow. Children run there, couples walk, old men nap beneath trees. No anthem ever played there, no command ever echoed, and that was the point. 3. The words they no longer needed, some phrases, vanished over time. When will it end? Have you heard the news? Key didn't come back. They told me to. I had no choice. In their place, new ones emerged. Want to sit with me a while? It's okay to not know. Do you want the last piece? Let's walk instead. Stay. 4. The table with a permanent extra chair in the mayor's home. There was a table with one more chair than necessary. No one used it. No one moved it. It wasn't for someone gone. It was for someone not yet here, a future neighbor, a friend in need, a version of oneself not yet ready to arrive. We leave it, the mayor said, because peace means there's always room for one more soul to rest. The night no one locked their doors, one night without planning it. No one locked anything, not because danger disappeared, but because trust arrived quietly, like fog in spring in the morning. Nothing was missing, except, perhaps, it's the fear that once slept beside the keys.vi, the letter they all signed. Without writing a tat, the edge of the village stood a stone, blank, smooth, unmarked. One day, someone traced their fingertip along it, then another, then another dot. Soon, it became known as the letter without words. No one wrote on it, but everyone touched it. Their hands became signatures. Their silence became a sentence. We were here. We learned. We tried. We made something new. 7. The song that didn't need to be sung. One child asked, "What's our anthem now?" And a woman answered, "It's in the way we greet each other. It's in how we wait our turn. It's the quiet we keep when someone's crying. It's the bread we bake, the stories we pass, the name we give a newborn when we stop naming them after the dead." Our anthem doesn't need music. It needs memory and mercy and mourning, hate. The last parade that didn't march, they held a final gathering, not with trumpets, not with uniforms, but with poems, scarves, bells. People walked slowly down the main road, carrying nothing but what they had learned. No banners, no flags, only candles. In one single whisper, passed person to person, "Don't forget what came after." 9. The peace that no longer asked permission. It didn't knock. It didn't bow. It lived in the bakery, in the tea shared before bedtime, in the books read aloud by children. In the boots taken off before entering someone's home. In the room that was left unpainted simply because the light hit the wall just right, and it stayed because no one tried to own it. They just kept making room for it. Daily X. The final question they no longer needed answered. Someone once asked, "What did we lose when the anthem stopped playing?" And the answer came, not in words, but in presence. In the mother who learned to laugh again. In the soldier who planted trees instead of obeying orders. In the child who grew up without memorizing fear, in a silence that was no longer hollow, but whole. And so the village stood, not rebuilt, but rewritten, relived, remembered in ways that monuments never could carry. They had stopped singing the anthem, but every step, every glance, every gesture that said, "I see you," became the new one, not of glory, not of victory, but of presence. The silence didn't take the anthem's place. The people did, and in doing so, they became everything the anthem once tried to promise, without ever needing to raise their voices.